was a good game. It was an exciting game. The quality of the rugby mightn't have been as high as we would expect from two outstanding teams, but there was great passion showed by both sides. But I must say, and the spectacle of the Aviva was absolutely wonderful. It's a wonderful stadium and it's testament to the interest in rugby, like that we could fill it for Munster and Leinster. But overall, from a Munster perspective, I was extremely disappointed.
Yeah, and I suppose the one statistic that you can't really get away from these last 5 games, because it is 5 games without a win for Munster against Leinster now, is that Munster have failed to score a single try in those 5 games. And looking at last night, they didn't really look like scoring a try at all at any stage.
It's an extraordinary statistic, like that we haven't scored a try against Leinster in all that time. An extraordinary statistic, and it wasn't because we lacked passion last evening. I think we just didn't have the cutting edge. We seem to miss. We don't appear to have the legs in the back line. We don't have any pace, like the real pace, like that Keith Earls would give us. He's a big loss, like, to us for pace. And if you don't have a cutting edge like that, a line breaker, it's very difficult to break down a defensive system with the likes of Darcy and O'Driscoll in midfield, particularly. You need Earls. Earls can slice these guys, but without his level of pace and expertise, it's impossible to break them down. I also think that our talisman, O'Connell, is a huge loss overall to Munster, and the sooner he gets back, the better, because he seems to be the man who really brings us to the higher level, and he is an incalculable loss.
Yeah, just sticking with the theme of Munster's lack of tries against Leinster, Moss, looking at last night, Munster played the majority of the game, I think, in their own half, and as long as you do that, I suppose you're not going to score too many tries if you are stuck in your own half. Absolutely
not. Not if you haven't got fellas in particular who can score from 50 yards either. I mean, the likes of Luke Fitzgerald, Shane Horgan perhaps, and Keith Earls. These guys can score from 50 yards, but we had no such players on the pitch last night. We needed, the only place we'd make could score tries perhaps would be sort of nearer the line and that. But it was difficult for Munster last night, and difficult for O'Gara and Tomás O'Leary to orchestrate things, because they were generally getting the ball for a large portion of the time on the back foot, and they found it very difficult to get out of their half. And O'Gara didn't really want to kick it away because Carney and Fitzgerald were coming back at them with interest, so he was in a very difficult position. So overall, I mean, it was a difficult night for Munster and a disappointing one.
Yeah, and on both sides last night, Moss, there were quite a lot of errors and turnovers. Now, Joe Schmidt made the point after the game that the conditions out there were a lot more difficult and demanding than they probably looked on TV, but still slightly worrying. I know it's early in the season and guys are still slightly rusty, especially the internationals. Some of them are only just coming back, but a lot of errors and turnovers which you wouldn't really expect from that standard of rugby.
A lot of handling errors, absolutely. But the conditions were poor. But what I was most disappointed with was Josh Smith, Joe Smith, the coach of Leinster, hasn't bedded in yet. You must give him bedding in time with Leinster, and they have been pretty horrendous this season. They've shipped nearly 40 points 3 times, which is most unusual. Mm-hmm. So they were really ripe for picking last night, and they were there for the taking. But unforced errors made by Tomás O'Leary knocking on in extraordinary positions when we were in the ascendancy, accidental offsides, balls going out on the full, that type of thing. Munster didn't help themselves in that regard, and seldom have I seen so many sort of top players play below their best when it really mattered. Whereas some of the Leinster guys, like he slipped now, and O'Driscoll even a little bit in the second half, they really stepped up, which made a difference in the end.
Yeah, and while it was a disappointing night last night for Munster, Moss, I suppose it's important to try and look at the positives as well, and one of those was that the physicality was certainly an improvement from the previous games against Leinster. I think Dennis Leamy and Tomás O'Leary were saying during the week they admitted that they haven't been physical enough against Leinster, but that's one area that they did match them last night.
They did, and I mean, and Dennis Leamy, to be fair to him, is the embodiment of that. I mean, he's an absolutely wonderful player. How he keeps going and making the hits he does, I don't know. He's had 2 shoulder reconstructions, a knee reconstruction, and he led from the front last night. And I have no doubt that if Munster had won the game last evening, he would have been man of the match, because his work rate is incredible, and his tackling and his hitting and his physicality. He brings that physicality to Munster. And, he's every bit as good for Munster as Heaslip is for Leinster, I believe. And he brought that physicality. And to be fair to Munster, it wasn't from a lack of passion that they were beaten. It was from a lack of actual ability at the end of the day. But they had no legs and they couldn't get the ball. But I wouldn't doubt their passion and their physicalities. And as I said, Dennis Leamy in particular was the embodiment of that.
Yeah, no, Moss, there's a bit of talk around this afternoon that there could be a sighting on the way for Lefemi Mafi. You know, he was responsible for a couple of high tackles last night, one on Darcy in the first half and another in the second half that he was sin bin for. Do you think he deserves further punishment for those tackles?
You need to be at the match. I couldn't quite glean from television whether he had an open hand or a closed fist, which was difficult for him. But Mafi has a propensity to tackle high all the time like that. He comes in with a flying arm, so you'd nearly have to see it sort of on slow-mo about 10 times before you'd actually adjudicate, and the sighting officers will do that. But he does have a tendency to go in high, and I just hope he doesn't get sighted, because we have a lack of midfield backs at this particular time, particularly going into the Heineken Cup.
Yeah, absolutely. No, just going back, Moss, to a point you were making earlier on about Paul O'Connell and his absence being felt. Do you see this Munster team being successful without O'Connell being available, because he is such a huge player and there's maybe possibly a lack of leadership there while he's absent?
There is. You see, it's hard to judge it last evening because the line wasn't great, and it was as much perhaps to do with Varley's throwing in not being great as opposed to the jumpers, because Donegal Ryan and Donegal Callan are excellent players. But I don't mean to criticise them at all, and I'm not, but O'Connell is a world-class player. I mean, he's in the top 2 or 3 second rows in the world, so any team is going to miss him, irrespective of who you replace him with. But Varley as well, Flannery is a loss as well, because Varley, no matter how good a player he is, and he's a wonderful talent carrying the ball, he's not good at throwing in. And when you see a fella copping out last evening, throwing a couple of balls just to the 5-yard mark, to short throws, that's a cop-out from the real throw-in to maybe the safe option at 2 in the line-out. And Varley was doing that. So when your line-out breaks down against a Leinster line-out that was imperious with Toner, the 6'10" guy, it makes it even more difficult. It's in that context that you would have O'Connell would be upscutling Toner, or maybe Varley might have more confidence throwing to an O'Connell, perhaps, but the combination of Flannery and the telepathy he has with O'Connell, the two of those has always been an axis that Munster has relied on, and it is a major loss. When push comes to shove in extremely difficult situations, Flannery would always find O'Connell, and you get out of the situation. So that is a huge loss overall.
Yeah, just looking ahead to next week now, Moss, it is the biggest game of the season so far, without doubt. A very difficult trip to London Irish. How much of an effect will last night's defeat have on Munster going into that game? Will it be a big knock to the confidence?
Perhaps not, in that we played well. The biggest thing about last night is losing 5 in a row to Leinster. But we played well in parts, and we did show passion, so I don't think it will damage our confidence too much. And the Heineken Cup is a separate entity completely, and it's a higher level than Magners League. You have to step up for that. So while it won't help our confidence, it might galvanise them into sort of unifying a little bit more. And if they match that passion, then they could do very well, because maybe London Irish aren't quite as good as Leinster.
Yeah, they have been going quite well so far. They're top of the Aviva Premiership. Just finally, Moss, can you see Munster winning over there next week?
The jury's out now, and I'll have to see what sort of injuries are there during the week. Look what kind of a team London Irish are fielding. They're top of the Premiership, as you know. See what carnage has been from last night, and what team Munster can put out. Maybe Earls might be ready. I don't know. I'll adjudicate later in the week, but at this point in time, I would say you would have to make London Irish favourites.
Okay, Moss Finn, as always, thanks for talking to us here on Red FM.
Very good, Paul.